everybody. So glad you've decided to join us this evening as we are walking through the book of Philippians, a beautiful, beautiful letter written by the Apostle Paul, and one that is an extremely encouraging letter and extremely important as we dissect the text and really get into the nuts and bolts of what's being said. That's our goal. And we do that so we can have a better understanding, and so we can be better, better Christians, better people, and a better example of what God wants us to be in order to bring Him glory. I do want to, before we jump into the text, just to give a little bit of an update. We heard from Anita McKinney, and of course she's in Lourdes at this time, room 513, I believe. I don't have my notes in front of me, so I'm pretty sure it's 513. But they did another a C-scan today. I almost said C-span. A C-scan today, and she is developing some fluid in her abdomen, and that can be very, very serious. And so they're going to do some procedures to try to alleviate that fluid, but she's still in the hospital, still a fairly serious thing she's going through, and surgery's still on the table. So hopefully these meds will work and she won't have to do that, but it's still a wait and see. But they're going to plan tomorrow to try to drain that fluid out. So we need to definitely remember her in our prayers. I haven't received any other updates from any of the other announcements from this morning, but I did want to let everyone know about that, so we can be thinking and praying for her. If we'll turn go ahead and open up our Bibles to the book of Philippians. We want to get back into the flow of the book. We don't want to study just a verse here and a verse there. That can be beneficial in some instances when we're doing topical studies, but as we're going through this book, we want to see the flow of the book. What is Paul really trying to say here? What's this letter saying? And of course, we don't read letters just a little here, a little there. We read them all the way through, and so that's what we're trying to do with this. And Paul, just to remind you, he begins the letter by really focusing on Jesus. He puts the reader's attention onto Jesus and stresses how Jesus is to be the center of everything in our life. In fact, Jesus is to be our life. And when that occurs, three things then follow. And so we place Jesus as at the center, Him being our example, our model for life, the purpose for life, and that's going to bring about unity among the brethren. It's going to bring about joy in life, and that unity and joy is going to bring peace. Peace with God, yes. Peace with the brethren, yes. And so having Jesus as the center of our life and Him being our purpose for life brings those three things: unity, joy, and peace. And that's the book. Some commentators have called this the epistle of ecstasy, and that's because of such a focus on joy and the joy that comes from being a Christian and working together with Christians, and the peace that comes from living the Christian life. And so this is just a beautiful, uplifting, encouraging book that teaches us how to be more like Jesus and the results of being more like Jesus: unity, joy, peace. And so we're in chapter 2, and in chapter 2, the basis is on unity. Paul's already set up how that Jesus is to be the purpose of our life, and that's going to bring about unity. But in order for that unity to come in our life and be reflected in our life, we have to be of like-mindedness. And that presents a problem because everybody's different. Our personalities are like our fingerprints. No two people have the same personalities. They may be similar, but they're not the same. We have likes, dislikes, we have preferences. And so that becomes, when we try to be like-minded on our own, outside of Jesus, leaving Jesus out of the equation, that becomes almost an impossibility. But no, we have to take the example of Jesus. And Paul would say in verse 5, have this mind in you that was in Christ Jesus. And last week we looked at what that meant. And specifically, he's talking about the attitude of being humble, literally being self-emptying. We're to be a self-emptying people. It's not about us. It's not about us. It's not about our families. It's not about our cliques, for lack of a better word, or our friend group within the congregation. It's not about us. It's all about Jesus. And Jesus had the attitude that here's God. Here's the second person of the Godhead. He's equal with God. He didn't think that was something that was something to be grasped, or didn't think it robbery, as one translation would say. And what did he do? He emptied himself. He put on flesh. He came to this earth and even died for humanity. He emptied himself. And we're to have that same kind of attitude, and that's the kind of attitude that brings about the unity in a congregation among God's people that God desires. Now, what does this look like in reality? What are the results of having this self-emptying attitude? How is that going to portray itself in our life? And that brings us to the next paragraph in chapter 2. We're going to read from verses 12 to verse 18 in Philippians chapter 2, and that's going to be our text for the night. This next paragraph that's going to show us what it looks like to be self-emptying, to be a humble people, deferring to others, and not having self front stage and center. All right, so let's read it together, and what we'll do is we'll come back and we'll comment through the text and make some applications as we go. So Philippians chapter 2 and verse 12. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you both to will and to do for his good pleasure. Do all things without complaining and disputing, that you may become blameless and harmless, children of God without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast the word of life, so that I may rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain or labored in vain. Yes, and if I am being poured out as a drink offering on the sacrifice and service of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. For the same reason, you also be glad and rejoice with me. Okay, so let's break this down. First word in the text, one of my favorite biblical words, therefore. It's our bridge word. And we always point that out because that's a connection to what was already said. And so Paul's making this connection to what has been said, to what he's about to say. Because we develop the mind of Christ, because as a result of that, here's what's going to happen. First of all, he mentions that our behavior is to be genuine. None of us like hypocrites, do we? In fact, if you read or do any research about some of these studies that have talked about why people leave the church, one of the biggest reasons is hypocrisy. Well, I saw someone do this and they proclaim to be something else. In fact, one of the biggest atheist arguments out there is the hypocrisy of Christians. It turns people away. We hate hypocrisy. And so Paul, right off the bat, says you need to be genuine. And he makes a brilliant picture of what that looks like. He says, you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence. Have you ever asked your child to do something? Maybe clean their room. And you go in there and they're laying on the bed maybe and they're watching TV and you say, you need to clean your room. It's getting a little out of hand. And so they get up and you're standing there for a second, maybe talking to them, telling them what to focus on possibly. And they start putting away some clothes or they start straightening up their desk and then you close the door. When you close the door, what are they going to do? In our mind as parents, we want them to continue to clean the room and do what they're supposed to be doing. But sometimes, and even if we think back to when we were teenagers especially, once the parent leaves the room, we can go back and do what we were doing beforehand, whether it's playing video games or watching TV or doing whatever. Paul says, don't be like that. You have that mind of Christ, not just when I was with you, but also now that I'm away from you, you be genuine. This isn't a thing for show, in other words. This isn't to be some hypocritical thing. This has to be genuine. If you want true unity, you have to genuinely act like Jesus. Follow his example. Humble yourself like Jesus. It can't be for show. We cannot be that Pharisee standing out there praying to God, looking straight up into heaven as if we're looking God in the eye and saying, thank you for giving me the ability to be so righteous, and sit there as a self-righteous hypocrite. We cannot do that and expect unity within a congregation or within the Lord's church. It has to be genuine. Paul says, hey, you did this while I was there, and now here I am. I'm away from you, and you're still doing it. He's patting them on the back, and he's stressing to us today, we have to be genuine as we strive to follow the self-emptying mindset of Jesus. But then he continues, and this is a portion of the verse that a lot of times we like to take out of context. I'm guilty of it myself, even though what we're proving in proof texting this is a true statement. But let's look at it and see what Paul is saying within the context. He says this, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Now, this is connected to the previous idea. We are in the middle of a sentence. In fact, this one sentence goes from chapter 2 and verse 12 throughout verse 13. This is all one idea. And so to take a portion of that out, and I've seen preachers use that as a whole point in a sermon. You have things you're obligated to do. Only you can do them. It's your own salvation. You need to take care of it. And that is true to an extent. But what is Paul saying within the context? He's talking about the genuineness we have to have if we're going to have unity within the congregation. And he connects that with your work. Remember, he said, you're doing it even though I'm not there. And so he's talking about having that mindset of Jesus, a self-emptying mindset of Jesus, even in his absence. And he says, you work it out. And it goes toward your own salvation. And as you're working that out, you do it with fear and trembling. But there's an addendum in the next verse. He says, for it is God who works in you, both to will and to do. There has been a century-long debate. And it's still going on today. It's gone on for centuries upon centuries. It's as old as even going back to the 2nd century. But it's this idea of grace and works. Are we saved by God's grace? Are we saved by the things that we do in response? Grace and works. And the way it's given, it tends to be an either-or proposition, when in reality it's both. You have one extreme, though, and the word that likes to be thrown around in theological circles is egalitarian. And that means I'm working my way. It's a work-based salvation. And this was the mindset of the Jews. Again, nothing new, right? This is the mindset of the Jews. It's all the way back into the Old Testament times, and they look at the law of Moses and they say, okay, I'm going to do this one, this one, this one, this one, and I'm going to ignore this one, this one, this one, talking about the laws that Moses set forth, that God through Moses set forth. And as long as I obey more than I disobey, well, God's got to let me into heaven. That will earn my way to heaven. And hence, that's why Jesus would get these questions during his ministry. What's the greatest command, Lord? In other words, what's my one-way ticket to heaven? What one command do I have to do to get straightway to heaven? And it comes from this egalitarian mindset, I'm working my way to heaven. The opposite of that is this Augustinian mindset. We might know it as Calvinism today. John Calvin basically just ripped off Augustine's ideas. But this Augustinian says there's nothing you can do. Whether you're a good person or a bad person, God has chosen you personally, whether to be saved or not. You can't reject it. You can't grasp it. And so you have these two extremes. It's grace only. It's works only. And usually, individuals will find themselves somewhere on the spectrum. Paul says here, God works hand in hand with us. What a statement, right? You work out your own salvation. In other words, you be genuine in your self-emptying attitude as you mimic the example of Jesus, and you do it to your own salvation, and you pay attention to it because it's serious. That's the idea of fear and trembling. Paul's not saying, oh, you better walk on eggshells throughout this life or else you're going to go to hell. And a lot of times we find Christians with that attitude and as a result are just miserable in their Christianity. That's not what God intended, and that's not what Paul's saying here. He's saying it's serious. You work it out. You make sure your attitude, your mindset is genuine, and you're not just doing it for show. You don't be like that teenager sitting on their bed, and when mom and dad comes in and says, clean your room, they get up and clean for a minute, and as soon as they leave, they go back to what they're doing. No! That's not the Christianity that we're to practice. It's to be genuine, and we make sure it's genuine, and we do it because it's a very serious matter. Because hypocrisy isn't going to be tolerated. And so there are things we must do, yes, absolutely. And we need to be serious about it. But we also need to realize that it's made possible by the grace of God. And God works with us in this. Now think about this idea of God working with us. The grace of God provided a way whereby man can be saved and forgiven and reconciled. All of those spiritual blessings, and he did that through Jesus going to the cross. Again, context is right here, isn't it? And so God's grace exemplifies itself in the cross, but also exemplifies itself through his word, which tells us how we're to act and how we're to be as the light of the world that we'll get to in just a minute, how we're to be as following the example of Jesus, how we're to be in order to bring God glory. He tells us all of that in his word. He supplies that to us. God works with us. But he also works with us providentially. In his providential protection, his providential blessings, all of which. So there's this common thread here. There is this joint effort between man and God that works to our salvation. And we work, we do things, we obey, not because we're earning our way to heaven. There's nothing correct in that sentence. There's no way we can earn our way to heaven or work our way to heaven. We work, and Paul says it right here. Look at this. To do for his good pleasure. You know why we obey God? We obey God because it pleases him. And we want to please him because of all of what he has already done for us. It should be a natural response to want to please God. Look at what he's given us. Look at what he's done for us. We as Christians are taught so many times throughout Scripture to be thankful. We're to be thankful individuals, thankful to God, absolutely, but also thankful to one another. We're to show gratitude. And when someone does something for us that we didn't expect, something that helped us in a tremendous way, our initial response right away is to be thankful for it. Now that's to one another. But even more so, wouldn't that apply to God? Considering everything God has done for us, and we want to please him. And so we do what he says. We obey. And that's not working our way to heaven. That's making sure we're pleasing to God because he has allowed us to be partakers of his grace. So it's not faith or grace, works or grace. It's both together. We obey to please God. And God assists us through his grace. And so what does that look like? Okay, here I am. I'm going to develop this self-emptying mindset of Jesus. It's going to be genuine. I'm serious about it. And I'm doing it to please God. So here's what it looks like within as it exemplifies itself. Look at verse 14. First thing he says, do all things. Okay, here's how you're going to develop it. Do all things. Now, all is an all-inclusive word, isn't it? He's not just talking about church work. He's not just talking about at home. He's not just talking about at school or at our secular jobs. Do all things. This is all-encompassing. Okay, how are we going to do it? Without complaining. Ooh. The word complain is sometimes translated murmuring. I like that word, murmur, because that's exactly what it sounds like, doesn't it? You get a group of people together and they're complaining about something, and all you hear, you don't even hear words after a while. It becomes this white noise. It just sounds like murmur, 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 murmur. Murmur. What do they call that? I think they call that an onomatopoeia. Maybe I may be wrong about that. It's a word that sounds like what it does. Murmur, 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 murmur. We're not to murmur and complain about what we're told to do. How does that bring unity? It destroys unity. Here's this good work we're going to do, and let's keep it in the context of the work of the congregation. Here's this good work, we're going to attempt to do this, and here comes the group. And it seems like it's always the same people, always the same group. Murmur, 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 murmur. How does that produce unity? It doesn't. It destroys it. We're not to be a complaining people. And then disputing. That's arguing. The word is fault finding. Okay, here's the plan. Here's the job we're going to do. And so here comes the complaints. And okay, let's break it down. Okay, well, this is just wrong. Y'all don't do it this way. And this is wrong too. And why are we doing it on this date instead of that date? And why are we doing this? Just not only complaining, but just fault finding in the plan. Or maybe fault finding in the individual. That doesn't produce unity. It destroys it. Destroys it. And here's this good work. Maybe it's something that's done annually. And one year you're going to do it just a little bit different, but here they come. Oh, we're not going to get our way, so we're going to tear it down with our words. Seen it happen firsthand. Shame on us. Do things without complaining, without murmuring, disputing, fault-finding, arguing. And if we can develop this mindset of Jesus, where we empty ourselves, because the complaints and the arguing and the murmuring and the fault finding, it all comes usually because, well, that's not the way I would do it. It doesn't fit what I would do. And so I'm going to attempt to tear it down. And that may not be the conscious thing is, hey, I'm going to tear down this work, but subconsciously that's what's happening in our complaining and arguing. But as we practice the mind of Jesus and developing that mind of Jesus, and we stop ourselves, we feel that complaint rise, and we swallow it down. We see that criticism start to boil up, and yet we understand this isn't constructive, and in the end, doesn't really matter, and it's not going to help the unity, so we swallow it down. Well, what ends up happening? That's a growth process. And this growth process is going to result in something. Look in verse 15. That you may become. You see the growth process there? I stifle my complaining. I stifle my fault finding. And I'm going to grow. That helps me to grow. And he says that you may become blameless. Word is innocent. Innocent. Well, this work would have gone a whole lot better if we had more unity, but we didn't have unity because so-and-so kept complaining. You know what? You can't be blamed with that anymore, can you? If you stifle it and work together and not make it about you and I have to have my way. Blameless, innocent, and harmless. The idea of harmless is you're not destroying the unity. You're working together. And harmless children of God without fault. People won't see the blemish. If you've ever been in a tumultuous situation in a congregation regarding something, and all of a sudden you look back, you don't see the good that comes out of it. You remember the negative. And when it's time to do it again, you don't want to have any part of it. Or maybe it just won't get done again. Seen that happen too. Why? Because people wanted it their way. We're to be blameless, innocent of that. We're to be harmless, not harming the unity of the church and thereby the work of the church. And without fault. And look at the description of this, without fault. Without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. You know, the world watches us. If we don't think the world is watching us, we're ignorant. The world's watching us. And when they see a congregation that's constantly infighting, that goes out and gossips to the world about individuals within that congregation, you know what the world thinks? They're supposed to be God's people. Huh. And notice what he says here and how he describes it. In a crooked and perverse generation. Now you go back to the first century, and they're living under Roman authority, the Roman Empire. And in fact, you can go over to verse 4, and what you read is that there are actual individuals in the house of Caesar himself who have obeyed the gospel. Now, the Caesar at this time is Nero, and if you know anything about history or have read anything about Nero, he was just completely morally debased. And yet there are individuals who are Christians within his household, meaning more than likely his servants or the people who work in his house, but they would also live in that house. Maybe, and it could be, possibly even referring to some members of his own family or extended family that would live in this palace proper. And yet they were having to strive to be this type of an example among these perverse people. Paul calls them crooked generation, crooked and perverse generation. We need to understand the unity of the church is so vital because the world is watching us. And if we're not serious about it, and if we're not careful with that unity, that working together in harmony for a singular purpose, we're not being what God wants us to be, number one. And number two, how are we going to reach the lost if we have such a poor reputation among them? This is serious business. And he says, why do you do that? Among whom you shine as lights in the world. I love the idea of a Christian being a light. It takes us back to the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. You're the light of the world. When you think of what all light does, you know, light reflects. And that's one of the more important things, one of the first things we need to understand. We're to be lights in the world. But the light source doesn't come from within. We're reflecting the light. We're reflecting the light of Jesus into the darkness of the world. Light reflects. And so here's Jesus shining as this light, this example, and we reflect that back out into the world. That's what our duty is as children, and that's what, as children of God, and that's what Paul is emphasizing here. We reflect the light of Jesus into the world, but light just doesn't reflect. Light also comforts. As little children, so many, I know I was like this, and so many times children, small children, are scared of the dark. One of the greatest childhood fears. And so nighttime comes and they'll have a little night light. Or they'll say, leave the closet light on and the door cracked. And we do that. Why? That light comforts them. Light comforts. Light comforts. We are to shine and reflect the light of Jesus into the world. But that's not all. We're to shine our light through the comfort that we give to the world. The church should be the one who's constantly involved, especially in a time like this where so many people are hurting and needing. And here we are, we're to be the light of the world, and the light is to be a comfort to the world, as well as a reflection of Jesus. Jesus didn't come to this earth just to say, hey, I'm here. What did he do? The book of Acts would say he went about doing good. How? He was involved in the needs of the people. He was a comfort to them. Light comforts. Light also guides. I woke up this morning and it was dark, early riser. And it was about 5 till 4, and I get in the car and I'm on my way to the gym. And as I'm pulling out of the garage this morning, I pulled to the end of the drive, and of course our security light's on, so I could see to get the car maneuvered out to face the street. But as I'm looking into 408, it's a lot darker than normal. Double checked to make sure the lights were on, and I even turned them off and turned them back on. It's just they were extremely dim. Now, I know that headlights over time tarnish, and that's been a problem of late, and I've looked online and done some things to help make them shine a little bit, and that's helped actually quite a bit. But this morning it was just strange because it wasn't like that yesterday. So I'm driving down 408, and it's very noticeable because 408 really doesn't have any street lights. They're very rare. And I'm thinking to myself, this just isn't normal. And so I get up to the light at 45, and of course no one's around. It's a red light anyway. And so I put the car back in park, and I get out and look, and sure enough, the passenger side headlamp is off. It's burned out. I'm going to have to replace it. But it made such a difference. Why? Because light guides us. As we're going and driving at night, we need our headlights so we can see where we're going. It guides us. It shows us where the road is. It shows us if any obstacles, if any deer are about to fly out in front of you. Had that happen on my way back to the building this morning too. Scared me half to death. Probably missed it by a couple of yards. Light guides. It's funny because I like to sleep in complete darkness. I even wear a mask so that no light can come in and disturb my sleep. But in the middle of the night, if I have to get up, I want to be able to see. So I take the mask off. I want us to be able to see the obstacles. We're to be a guiding light for the world. We reflect the light of Jesus. We comfort the world in their needs, but we're also to guide them. And through our example and through our words, we guide them to the cross because we're to be the light of the world. But not only that, the light of the world also acts as a warning. We think of that song, and I've been trying to think of it all afternoon. It's this idea of a lighthouse shining out into the sea and guiding a ship to shore. And that light guides, but it's also warning them of the obstacles that are in the way. Let the lower lights be burning. That's the song. Let the lower lights be burning. Traffic lights warn, don't they? They tell us when to stop, tell us when it's okay to go. Sometimes you'll come up to railroad tracks and that arm comes down and there's flashing lights. They're warning you the train's about to come. We're to warn the world as well because light warns. We warn the world about the consequences of rejecting Jesus. We warn the world about living in the consequences of living a sinful life. If we're going to be the light of the world, all of that's involved in it. And Paul says here we are to shine as lights in the world. And then he says, holding fast the word of life. Another translation of that would be to hold forth. And it really does change the meaning here. Hold fast would be like we're staying faithful and we're holding on to that word of life and we're standing strong in it. And that is a true concept. It goes back to what Paul would say in 1 Corinthians 15:56. But the idea here is to hold forth. It's like we're holding something out. We're holding something out to the world. And that fits better the context as well. We're offering to men the message of life. That's our purpose. We adopt the mind of Christ. We're going to adopt the mind of Christ. It's going to be that self-emptying influence, or that self-emptying attitude, but part of that is being concerned about the souls of mankind. Emptying of self, part of that is going to be taking the gospel to the lost. And as Paul sums up here, he says, I'm glad and rejoice with you all. And it's in a context where he says in verse 16, I've not run in vain, I've not labored in vain. And here it is, you do all of that, and you develop the mind of Christ, and you are unified, and you get the work of the church done, and the church is going to grow, and you're going to ultimately receive your reward. And Paul says, no matter what I've been through in this life, remember, he's writing from a prison cell, chained to a guard. No matter what I'm going through, or what I've gone through, Paul ultimately says it's all worth it. So even Paul here exemplifies that self-emptying mindset. Beautiful passage. As we continue on next week, we're going to look at two examples. Paul puts up Timothy and then Epaphroditus as examples of this, to help us better understand not just the importance of unity, but how it's to look in life. And so I hope you'll make your plans to join us again live, 5 o'clock on Sunday night, as we continue our study in Philippians. Wednesday night, we'll be here live in the building all together. We're going to sing together and study as we continue through and hopefully finish up 1 Peter, and then we'll go into 2 Peter. And then Sunday, 10 a.m., Lord willing, we'll be able to be back here worshiping live together, and I hope you're looking forward to that. I hope everyone has a wonderful week. I hope everyone has a productive week, and I hope to see you again Wednesday night, 7 o'clock, live at the building. And like always, we're going to be live streaming everything. So if you find that it's not safe, health conditions, whatever it be, you can join us live here on this YouTube channel, through our Facebook page, as well as PottsvilleChurchOfChrist.com. On the cover page of it, the live stream is there as well. So hopefully you'll make your plans either virtually or here at the building, Wednesday night, 10 a.m. Sunday, and then we'll be virtual together again, 5 p.m. Sunday night.